What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Real Life Podcast. I'm Brian.
And I'm Craig.
Hey, thanks for the change in venue today.
Right.
We're not at your house filming. We're at my house.
Right.
Because I have a puppy.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, we got
a new addition.
We got a puppy.
He is super cute.
He is super cute. He's chewing on the cord right now. So if this mic goes out, it's because he's chewing on the cord. Zeke. Anyway, his name's Zeke. My daughter's named him. He's super cute. Here, let's show everybody.
Let's say, hey, Zeke.
Here he is.
Oh,
Look
my goodness.
at him. You're a good boy. You're a good boy. All right. Now go sleep and lay down. Do something like that. Anyway, so actually having this puppy has reminded me of some things that I said on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So we started this new series called Grace and Grit.
Right.
We're going through Philippians. Paul is in jail, which I've never been to jail, like I said, but it is. It doesn't sound like it's a good time, especially first century Roman prison. Right. That's where he's at. He's in Rome, writing this letter, and he opens it up, and there's a kind of a well-known passage of scripture where he says, I'm confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will complete it or bring it to completion, which was good. And then he immediately kind of goes into something else where he says, talking to the people in Philippi, that I want you to share in God's grace with me. And then he even says, I've longed for you with the affections of Christ. And so there's that phrase, share in God's grace. And different translations kind of word it a little differently. But that idea of sharing in God's grace is, I feel like, something that is worth a conversation.
Sure.
Because I ask in this series, have you ever found it difficult to be a Christ follower? And I think one of the most difficult things for people is sharing grace with one another.
Right.
Like extending grace.
Right.
And so I think it'd be cool to talk about like what that is.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Versus what it isn't.
Yep.
And this is where a puppy kind of reminds me of some of this, because he's just a little boy. He's chewing on cords. You don't want to chew on that power cord, bud. He's chewing on cords and all kinds of stuff like that.
We have to show him some grace.
And yeah, you have to show the dogs a little bit of grace. I think he's moving the camera even. The camera moving is the dog. So hey, man, you're gonna make me edit this podcast, and I never edit the podcast.
There we go. Come in here, Zeke. Come and join us.
I'm gonna hold him.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hold the puppy. So he makes me share a little bit of grace, because he's just a puppy. Look at him. And you want to, but sometimes it's hard when he doesn't behave. And I feel like it's the same with people.
And as they become less cute, then there seems to be less grace that we feel like we want to share, right?
Yeah, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Isn't that right? But you always think I'm cute, which is nice that you always think that, because you're very gracious with me. No, but asking the question, like, why is it so difficult? Why is it so hard to share grace?
Yep. So there's a couple of things that come to mind, and excuse me, and maybe we unpack these a little bit. So one is, do I fully understand God's grace for me? What does that mean? That's kind of something that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And then, in my lack of understanding of His grace, then I think that influences the grace I show to others.
Say that again.
I think in the lack of understanding God's grace for me, that influences the grace I'm able to show to others.
Yeah, I think that's I think you nail it really early on.
Right.
Is if I understood the grace that I've received, it would help me be willing to share it. And I said this on Sunday, and I think I've said it other places too before, but it's kind of a recent realization for me, is that there's a huge difference in between extending grace to a person, extending patience to a person, extending acceptance to a person of like, hey man, I understand where you're at.
Right.
And that's okay. Like there's a huge difference in that versus how I've kind of really, if I'm going to be honest, done ministry for a long time, is kind of navigated it being the guy who's good at quote unquote connecting with people.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like, oh, well, you're good at connecting with people. You seem normal is what people say to me. And that just means that like, I don't have a really big pious attitude. I have some tattoos. Maybe I'm prone to cuss every now and then, you know?
Right.
And so that immediately goes, oh, well, yeah, I must be sharing grace. I must be really connecting with people.
Right.
There's a huge difference in between actually extending grace to people versus just being relatable.
Yeah.
Like, but for me, if I'm being really honest, I tricked myself
Yeah.
into thinking being relatable
Okay.
is
extending grace.
is extending grace.
Yeah, and
to
that's
someone.
they're different.
It's not even close.
Right.
Like for me, trying to intentionally practice extending grace and extending patience. Like, and you know, if you're a parent, if you had any kind of relationship, like you think you do this, you know what I mean? But I think there's a difference in between tolerating something and extending grace to a person, extending patience to a person. And I feel like I probably lived a large portion of my life being tolerant, tolerating certain things, and being relatable and calling that grace.
Grace, yeah.
And for me, that's a really eye-opening lesson that I've learned recently.
I can get that. And I think that maybe another side of it or another aspect of it is that showing grace doesn't mean that we condone or accept a particular poor behavior either.
For sure. It's not celebrating like terrible behavior.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, oh man, yeah, I killed somebody. It's like, hey man, it's cool. Don't
all
worry.
good.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Like, or hey man, good job. You're really good at killing people. Like,
Right.
That's not extending grace. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
Right. It's not celebrating poor behavior, but extending grace is saying, I love you anyway.
Yeah. That's good. Say that again.
Yeah. That's what extending grace is. Extending grace is, I love you anyway.
Yep.
Like, in spite of your poor behavior.
Right.
I love you anyway. I'm not going to celebrate. I'm not going to give you a trophy. I love you anyway.
Yep.
Like, and not like, I love you anyway, but you need to hear me lecture you about your bad behavior.
Right.
No, I love you anyway.
Yeah.
Like,
because God first loved me.
Yeah.
In my
because
crap.
Because that's how God relates to me.
Yeah.
Like, I feel conviction from the Holy Spirit. Sure, I feel chastisement when I go astray, right? When there's sin in my life. Like, yes, of course, I feel that. But what God says to me over and over and over again through Scripture and in my relationship with Him is, I love you anyway.
Right.
Like, His love for me, His grace for me is not predicated on my behavior. That's not what grace is.
Exactly.
That's what tolerance is.
Yep.
Right. That's what being relatable is. That's not what grace is. Grace is, I love you anyway. I'm not going to celebrate your behavior, but I love you anyway. You don't have to be perfect.
It's completely disconnected from my behavior.
Yeah.
In fact, you could even say that Paul talked about that the more sin abounds and the more grace abounds. So that grace is even more fantastic in the depth of my sin.
I've read that passage, and it gets buried in my mind with the next phrase when he says, like, so do we go on sinning?
Sinning, yeah.
Like, of course not.
Yep.
And like, that's what gets hammered in my mind is like, well, stop sinning.
Yeah.
Like, stop sinning, stop sinning, stop sinning. It's like, I told the church this weekend, and I'm still like, just to make it really clear, there's never been a sermon that I've taught that I have perfectly practiced. Like, just so that's clear out of the way. Like, there's never been a sermon that I've preached that there isn't some hypocrisy in my heart.
That's the truth, right?
Like, there's never been one. And so when I tell the church, like, man, you cannot out sin like God's purpose for your life. You cannot out fail God's grace. Like, that doesn't mean that I 100% believe that for me.
Sure.
Or that I even practice it.
Yeah.
But man, I believe it's true.
Yeah.
Like I still believe that it's true.
And that's okay. You can believe it and not do it and not practice it, right? That's entirely possible.
Yeah, I think it's called trying to be a Christian.
Right.
Like I believe it.
In fact, not only is it possible, it's that we are all doing that.
Yeah,
so
that's actually the way it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and that's that messiness, right?
But why is it so hard? Like why is it so hard to extend grace to a person?
So I think part of it is because we in our humanness default back to this performance metric that I want to rank my belief about myself and therefore my belief about others based on a rank of performance. How good are you? How bad did you sin? How good did you do this? How bad did you do that?
How bad did you sin?
Yeah. And even how good are you? How much money do you have in the bank? You know, how long have you been married? How many great kids have you got? Whatever it may be. How healthy is your body?
What happens a lot of times, not just, and I'm not just saying this about other people. What happens in me a lot of times is if I've been wounded before, and you do something that smells like that, you get the full treatment of all of my pain.
Right.
Like, sorry, I don't have any grace for you, even though you weren't the one that actually did this to me.
It reminded you of what someone else had done.
This feels like that.
Yep.
And maybe that's not even your intention.
Right.
But it feels like that.
Yep.
So I'm gonna write you off,
Yep.
or you're as guilty as this person.
Right.
That was way over there, and so I'm gonna treat you like.
So you immediately rank my behavior with something in your own mind that's been triggered from a past experience.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with me.
Yeah, nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Like it's just like that. And I know a popular word like right now in culture is like that triggers.
Yeah.
That triggered that. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that are triggered over everything. But sometimes me too.
Yeah.
You know, like I like to be real critical about that and be like, oh, well, they're so triggered.
Yep.
Sometimes me too. Like,
yeah,
you can behave a certain way.
Absolutely.
And it reminds me of something else.
Absolutely.
It feels like something else. And so guess what? No grace for you.
Right. And so here's something I've been working on for a few years now, but maybe recently, is that the trigger to me is I want it to be an indicator for me to be curious and compassionate on myself and not to suddenly fall into this trap of that's your fault.
Yeah.
I want it to be an indicator that I need to look inward and this is something I need to do, some work I need to do between me and God.
Well, that's the other thing too, and I think we've talked about this before on the podcast a little bit. It's like, man, if I don't have any grace for myself,
right,
like I'm not going to have any for anyone else.
Right. So that whole idea then of when we're back to where we started was why do we find it hard to show grace to others? Maybe the question is that's not so important as what is it about me that's finding it hard to show grace, not about them. And let's have
that is so good, dude. That's so good.
Isn't that?
It's not they don't deserve grace.
Yeah.
It's what is it about me, not their behavior.
Right.
What is it about me that is stopping me from sharing and extending grace to that person? And I can tell you for myself, it is me assuming that I am gracious.
Ooh.
But I'm not.
Yeah.
But I assume that, no, I am gracious.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at it
No,
as well.
I am great. No, I'm good at being gracious.
Yeah.
No, I don't judge people. Like, no, I treat everyone the same.
Right.
I'm relatable. I have tattoos.
Yep.
What are you talking about? Of course,
I've
I'm
got grey
gracious.
hair. I'm wise.
Yeah.
I'm calm. I can be gracious with people.
I'm
No problem at all.
I'm a pastor. Of course, I'm gracious.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the thing that stops me from showing grace to other people is the lie that I tell myself that I already do it.
Yeah.
Like
The same.
but that's not the reality.
The same.
Like, ask the people in my life if I'm gracious. That's a better indicator.
Right.
If I want to find out if I'm gracious or not, if you want to find out if you're gracious or not, ask the people in your life. Ask the people closest to you if you have grace. Like, love that is not based on performance.
Yep.
Love that is not based on behavior.
Or that other unmerited favor.
Yeah. Ask ask the people closest to you.
Yep.
If you have a lot of grace.
Right.
but you better be real brave before. You better pray for some grace to receive the answer.
I don't know. I want to ask that question, man.
For me, I can tell you it's no.
Yeah.
It's no. It's the realization that I assume my own correctness.
Yeah.
I assume my own righteousness.
Right.
Like, of course I'm graceful. Like, of course I'm not. I'm not.
And here's another way that I hide that is then I want to go into a fix-it mode, right? So I've seen a fault in you. I'm going to show this fake grace, and I'll back that up with you need to A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
You need to X, Y, Z. And then, you know, aren't I wonderful then? Because not only have I identified your issue and I've shown you this grace, which is fake grace,
Yeah.
but now I'm helping you be a better person because I'm telling you all the right things.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
There's nothing gracious in that behavior at all.
I see you and I accept you, and you should listen to everything that I'm telling you to do, and I will continue to like you. But if you don't do all these things,
you know me too well.
Then
I do that.
Yeah. No, I've done that. Like, I've seen, if I'm being really honest, I've seen that's the vast majority of how the church relates to people. Right. I will tell you right now, I'll go ahead and out the vast majority of churches that you've probably attended is that they're not very gracious. And there might be some people that would say, "How dare you say that?"
And I was one of them.
Yeah, it's
and I probably still am in many ways.
Yeah, the reason why I can say it is like, well, you go into church with your mess, and you see how gracious people are. It's like the reality is, it's like we're not, and I've already admitted I'm not, and I struggle with it, and it's really hard. And the reason why I'm not is because, for me, I think my biggest hurdle, beyond seeing and experiencing and enjoying the grace that God has for me, it's me calling tolerance or even weakness grace. You know what I mean? Like, well, I'm not going to say anything. Like, I'm not going to, I'll just let people, people are people, just let them be, and really, like, and that might be actually me being more cowardly than gracious. It's like, I think I know for certain I've done that.
Yep.
Where it's, I will take tolerance or cowardice, or apathy and say, look how gracious I am. Yep. It's like, well, I don't think, any of those three virtues are necessarily what God would celebrate.
So where I go with that is, tolerance to me is something that I do when I feel weak, lack courage, and so I'm just going to tolerate it. And that's not grace.
That's the thing. Tolerance isn't for you. Yeah. Tolerance is for me.
Yeah.
Like, so I can avoid conflict.
Right.
So I can avoid
that's exactly where I was going to go.
It being uncomfortable.
Comfortable. Yeah.
Tolerance isn't for you.
Yeah.
Grace is for you.
Yep.
Not tolerance. Tolerance is for me.
Yeah, there you go.
And so when you start to see, like, oh man, like I'm really bad at showing grace. Like, and it probably means I'm pretty bad at receiving it. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
If I'm bad at showing it, I'm probably pretty bad.
No doubt.
I'm probably pretty bad at receiving it.
There is absolutely a link there.
But like, how wild is that when I'm a Christ follower. How wild is that when the position of God, my relationship with God through Christ is grace, grace, and more grace. Mm-hmm. Like, he is abundantly graceful to me over and over and over again. And I'll either won't receive it, which is wild to think about, the God who knows me, who formed me,
right,
who sees me, who reconciled me to himself through the cross. And I go, I'm good. No, I'm good. I'm tolerant already.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's absolutely.
But I act
really
like
is.
that.
Yeah.
But I act like that.
No, me too.
And it's like, man, I imagine for myself, like, man, how different would my life and relationships be if I was actually gracious with people, if I actually extended grace and patience and acceptance, and not like call tolerance and cowardice and my propensity to avoid conflict, like call all that being grace, me being relatable. I call all that grace. It's like, man, how different would my relationships be?
Exactly. I like when you talk back where Paul says, this idea that if I understand grace so deeply, then in fact, I think it's an indicator. It's an indicator of how truly I understand grace is I should get to the point where I almost want to say, so what should I do? Just keep on sinning? Yeah. I have to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
Where
I always view that verse as like, I view it in the wrong context.
Yep.
Like how it's supposed to be viewed is what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
To be so infatuated with grace that the conclusion is, well, should I just keep on sinning?
I could just keep on sinning because I know there's so much grace available.
I could just
from
keep,
God.
I could just keep going.
I could keep have every mistake in the world, be the complete biggest so-and-so ever, and his grace is sufficient.
Yeah.
But yet our response should be, in knowing that, that then, okay, no, of course not.
He says, of course not.
Yeah.
Right? But to lead you to that point, to that point of, so I can't out sin his grace.
Right.
Like, so I can't, because where sin abounds, grace even more.
Yep.
Like where there's sin, there's even more grace. Like no matter what. Well, what about this sin? What about that? What if this person does this to me?
Yeah. Oh, that's the line. There's the line.
Yeah. Because it eventually runs out, right? It's got to run out.
There's a line there somewhere,
What if it doesn't? What if it doesn't?
And that's the point. There never is.
Yes.
And you can and we talked about this, a couple of weeks ago as well. Was there is nobody. There's evil people on this planet. I'm evil. And many people have done horrible, evil things. And so then people say, "Oh, but isn't that that unforgivable?
Yeah.
Isn't that complete?" No. If we understand that God's grace is infinite, then there is no human being that is not capable of receiving that grace ever. And I don't care, you could be thinking of the worst, most evil person on this planet ever, and there's been plenty of them.
Yeah.
But the grace is available to them. Now, whether they avail of that grace or not is our choice.
Well, and this is what I always think of, like when you start to mention like evil people and all that, because I know everybody's minds goes towards like, well, there's somebody worse than me.
Yeah.
But I always try to remind myself, like, evil people, the people that you're thinking of, they're not waiting for permission to do evil things, right? And so if I'm a Christ follower, like, why in the world would I wait for permission to be gracious? Yeah. Like, well, once God tells me that I can be gracious to that person, then I will.
Yep.
It's like, why would I? They're not waiting for permission to do evil things. Why in the world would I wait for permission to show grace to someone? Like, well, when I'm ready, I'll show grace. And believe me, I understand pain. I understand trauma. I understand, like, healing. I understand that all that is a process. But it can start early on in you before you even see, like, the tangible, like, completion, right? Like, if you've wronged me, I might struggle with that for a second. You know what I mean? Like, if there was something really painful that you did to me or that affected me in a real painful way, I understand that there's process and healing, and there's things that you have to really work through and do really hard introspective work. Why am I holding on to this so tightly?
Right.
Like, there's all kinds of stuff that's like, I'm not negating any of that. But really early on, I can choose to say, I'm going to be grace. I'm going to extend grace here. And the sooner I do that, the sooner my healing process will begin. Like,
absolutely.
That's the reality.
Absolutely.
I will push out my healing, and I will extend out how long I will be in pain and suffering. The longer I refuse to extend grace to you. But the moment I choose,
and the pain and suffering for me, it will continue.
Yeah, but the moment I choose to extend grace, not tolerance, not being relatable, not being apathetic, like, oh, who cares? Well, they did that bad thing, but whatever, who cares? Not that. That's not grace. Like, don't call that crap grace. That's not grace. Like grace is, I'm going to love you anyway.
Yep.
Like I might not be your best friend in the whole world right now,
Right.
but I'm going to love you anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
Like I'm when I'm sitting and thinking about you, I'm going to pray for you. And it might sound like this. Help me not hate Craig.
Yep.
Help me not hate him.
Yep.
I don't want to hate him. Like that might be what the prayer sounds like.
Right.
You know what I mean? But the moment I decide that is how I'm going to act.
And you're doing it for you,
Yeah.
not for me.
Yeah. That's because that's the moment I decide that's how I'm going to act.
Yep.
That's the moment my healing process will actually begin.
Say that again.
Yeah.
The moment you decide.
Yeah, the moment that I decide to extend grace to you is the moment that my healing process begins.
Yeah.
It won't start until then.
Yep.
Like go to a million therapists.
Yep.
Won't start until then.
And it's at that moment that we then submit to God's grace in us.
Yeah. Well, because that's the only way that I can.
Yeah.
That's the only way that I can extend grace.
Right.
Because I don't have any in me.
Yeah.
I have none. I don't have, like Paul has this big long list in that passage that we went over on Sunday. None of that I have. Talks about knowledge and understanding. It's like, sure, like I have some life experience.
Yep.
Like I think that I have some good ideas. I think that I can make a decent choice.
Right.
But like none of that comes from me. He talks about having love, having fruits of righteousness. Like none of that is
From you.
From me. I generate none of that myself.
Right.
Like so all of that is grace anyway. And when you start to realize, I've been attaching a word to grace recently at Wellspring, and I'm going to keep on doing it until people really relate the two together. I've been telling our family, like, man, we believe in scandalous grace.
Yeah.
Like, it is scandalous. The fact that I would extend grace to you.
Yep.
The fact that God would extend grace to me, that is scandalous. Like, and I love that. I love that word because it seems like, oh, you're not so, it's taboo.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's one of those things of like, that's what grace is, man. It's,
Well, it's the type of word that snaps your brain into thinking this is, because if you've been around church long enough, you know, oh yeah, I've got grace. But so you put the word scandalous in front of it and it snaps your brain. Oh my goodness.
But I can't.
Grace is way beyond what I can ever imagine.
Yeah.
And his grace for me is way beyond what I can ever imagine. So, and because of his grace through me, I can extend grace to others way beyond.
Yeah.
In a scandalous way.
In a scandal.
I like it.
Yeah. Even to like a 7-week-old puppy that refuses to use the puppy pad or go outside.
Right.
Like I can extend grace even there even in that silly way.
Or to that person in your life who did something horribly hurtful.
Yeah.
And maybe you're thinking of that right now. You've been listening here for a bit, and even as we've been talking, I've been thinking of, you know, some of those people and things happen. We come across people who treat us poorly, because guess what? We treat others poorly.
Yeah.
I've certainly done it to others.
Yeah, for sure.
I need that grace extended to me. So if there's people that we're thinking about, then here's an actionable step out of a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Is take the time to understand God's grace for me, for you, and then how can I extend that to somebody else? And it doesn't, and as we said, it doesn't mean condoning their behavior
or
tolerating it,
celebrating, or any of that stuff.
but it does mean that I can show them love and kindness in the midst of their mistake.
And don't wait for permission. This is what permission looks like. Permission looks like, well, when they're gracious to me, I'll be gracious to them.
Right.
No, that's not grace.
And if you're all sitting there going, oh, thanks, you know, that's good for you guys and not for me, then just understand it's
bro. It's what we're talking about is so hard.
We struggle with it big time.
I'm gonna end this podcast and immediately struggle with this.
Yeah, right. As I said, I'm sitting here. I've got people running through my mind, going, "Oh my goodness, I have not shown them grace, and I need to do that." But
it's scandalous, but man, I'm striving after it.
Yeah,
like because that's the life that I desire for myself, and I have a sneaking suspicion that that's the life that God desires for me too.
Yep.
And so, I'm not going to do it perfectly.
And that's okay.
And he's going to have grace for me that I'm not doing it, but he's going to love me anyway.
Absolutely.
Like, and so,
absolutely.
So it's a scary thing, but I can try to be brave.
Yeah.
Like I can try to be brave, and I might not always be, but there's going to be grace for me.
And just in case you're wondering, then that God that shows the same grace for Brian will show it for me and will show it for anybody else. He is he's got more than enough grace for all of us.
100%. If you want to come and hear some more scandalous grace, or maybe meet some people that hopefully will try to extend it to you, maybe not perfectly, but we'll try to extend it to you, come hang out with us at Wellspring on Sundays at 10 a.m. at the Bear Levin Studer YMCA. We would love to see you there. Have a good one.
Bye.